All right, so we're now recording again, everyone. This is the succession planning and fleet management. The floor is now yours. We started about 7-8 minutes late. That'll cut into the break a little bit, but no big deal. So, Philip, take us away.
Okay, so good afternoon. I know I've been watching this conference and I'm learning a lot and hope everybody else is also. So I'm Phil Goglas. I'm one of the Eastern directors of the FDSOA. We're going to have 4 speakers on this topic of succession planning and fleet management. So let's get started. We'll start out first with Chief Terry Stewart, who worked for the Mississauga Fire Company and Fire Department in Ontario, Canada, the 6th largest fire department in Canada. In the early 90s, the city of Mississauga developed a citywide master plan. The chief, Chief, how did the fire department fit into the master plan that was developed? Chief?
Thanks, Philip. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to speak today about a personal experience. I don't have a PowerPoint, and I'm going to give you the short, cold notes of what happened to us. So Mississauga sits beside the city of Toronto for geography. Approximately 750,000 is the population, 111 square miles, 23 fire stations, staff of 650, including support. So in the early 90s, the city was very, very proactive in preparing a master plan in preparation for widespread urban and business growth. The city was very young. They had an extremely good tax base. They had good infrastructure. So at the time, Chief Gary Morden was a training chief. He was assigned with the city to work on the master plan on behalf of the fire department. And right after that, Chief Morden went on to be the fire chief. The city started to grow at an extreme fast rate. We were hiring new recruits, buying new fire apparatus, we're building new fire stations. The fire department was in a great direction. We were functioning well. We were meeting goals in the master plan. Then in the mid-2000s, Chief Morden developed cancer. Chief Morden, God bless him, was succumbed to his cancer at a very early age.
Okay, so Chief, with the loss of that chief, what kind of impact or adverse influence did it have on your operations and the fleet?
Well, really none whatsoever, Philip. The deputy chief stepped in as the interim chief's role. The department stayed status quo with minor senior staff movement. As we know, new chiefs, senior staff changes, always creates a different look in the department. Reaching about 2010, around there, budget started to tighten a little bit. Apparatus was starting to show age from the increase in call loads from urban sprawl, more businesses. The city was growing at an extreme rate, both widespread out and up. So there was a lot of things going on. Replacement schedules were on 15 and 20 years. Fleet manager retired. One was appointed from senior staff from another division with not a lot of fleet background. The interim chief then retired. The new chief from outside in 2013, obviously he had a new vision in the department. Apparatus was being deferred into the next year for replacement, sometimes 2 years, sometimes more, depending on the apparatus. There was no maintenance program in place, no annual testing being done. General repairs, believe me, turned into extreme large major repairs. Major repairs turned into vehicles taken out of service. We normally ran with 6 spares. They had to be put back into frontline units. We had a couple of units that we took ladders off to run as pumpers. So you can kind of see the difficulty that we were in.
Okay. Chief, I've been able to review some of the information that you provided. So this must have had an exceedingly difficult time in the department. Question comes to my mind here about the level of service and the operation of any defective and unsafe equipment. Maybe you can expand on that.
So really at no time was a level of service compromised. And we also had at that time an extremely comprehensive driving program, which I will say that is very tied to a good fleet management system. A good driving program works very well with that. The operators never drove unsafe vehicles. The fleet struggled with repairs. Budgets were being depleted. And it comes back to where can we find some money? We got to get some work done, repairs completed. It was overwhelming in the parts department. Overtime for 8 mechanics. The workload was extremely difficult for them. And then the communications division, they're trying to move crews and apparatus around to cover halls. In the mornings, district chiefs, they had to make sure they had coverage. Then the recruit program suffered immensely. There was no truck for them to use for 16 weeks. We had to take frontline vehicles out when we could to get them around to fire apparatus. So there was a lot of things going on, touching every division in the service right at that time.
So it looks like you had a plan, but then things started to change. So can you sum up what those things were, and some of the failings of that system?
Sure. Well, the department was just operating status quo, and we were just going behind. There was no question about it. We were moving behind in fleet, and we just couldn't get it back up. Senior staff retirements, which caused a lot of problems. We just didn't keep up with the demand of the apparatus that we needed at the time with the age of them. Mechanics weren't enrolled in the EPT program, minimal training and education for mechanics, stopped traveling out of the province, no apparatus maintenance program again, annual testing fell by the wayside, replacement schedule did not work like it did in the 90s and the 2000s.
Okay. And what did the department do to correct some of those fleet inconsistencies?
Well, in short, Philip, in 2014, we had to make an emergency buy of 4 pumpers and 2 aerials off a lot. That's where we were at. Obviously, that was an extremely small Band-Aid. And once again, the fleet manager retired. So we're back into that. And there was no formal plan that a new one could see. So that created a difficulty there too.
Can you go over some of the corrective actions that your department took to bring the fleet back to where it should be?
Well, with the new fire chief in place, he appointed a new fleet manager from within, which had an extremely good background in fleet. And his first order of business was to start one of the biggest apparatus procurements the city had ever seen in the fire department. And it carried a substantial cost. Thankfully, when the procurement was about to be released, the city could fulfill the needs of it, which was an extraordinary piece that happened there. With the new fleet manager in place, spec committee went to work. They spec'd the units, and they changed old specs into what they were needed. So they were doing a good job there. We replaced 2/3 of the fleet, which turned into 27 units. So with the 6 already previous and the 27, so within a 5-year span, we replaced 33 units, which is extremely difficult in a department that size. And the fire chief retired. Then the new chief in place, very experienced as we speak of this spring of this year. Chief Rizzi, she will bring the department around. She's extremely well educated in management, and she was a boot and grew up through the ranks. There's a new fleet manager in place, made a lateral move from city, new shop foreman from inside the mechanical division. So as of right now, they've really taken on a welcome new look in the division. Mechanics now have a graduated mechanics as they progress in their careers. They're all enrolled in the EVT program to become masters. Brian and myself completed an F1 and 2 through FDOSA recently. We'd like to move on and do more with them. Because of COVID, we just can't do that right now. But we're planning September to do an F3 there. So they are moving forward. Apparatus replacements now is 12 and 15, which is a big step forward. Not that easy to do for some departments. The shop foreman now has started to develop a formal maintenance plan. Now they're working on special vehicle replacement. NFPA testing is back in line internally. NDT testing, obviously, by a third party. Pump testing is by a third party. And back in place now is a new graduated comprehensive driving program. So you can see these are important areas they have implemented now. And obviously, in a dire situation, to bring the fleet back up to operation and maintain standard. They are enrolled in accreditation, but it's not complete yet. So in closing, everyone, I strongly believe in the fire fleet, there needs to be a strong succession plan, and it needs to be shared within the department. It's not just fleet, it's the whole department. Visited frequently with manageable outcomes and achievable goals. But again, on the smaller side, fleet managers and mechanics and fire fleets, city fleets, third-party repair facilities, which Brian and I are seeing more of those people coming into the EBT program with FDOSA. So whether you're a volunteer setting, composite, career fire, it's imperative to stay current in NFPA through training and education, conferences. And like you've heard in the last couple of days, reach out to the manufacturers. There's a lot of great information, but try to stick to the pieces from manufacturers that you use on your vehicles, unless you're R&Ring something new, just to stay current. And I ask you please to learn from our mistakes made, lessons learned, and corrective actions. Thanks for listening.
So if I could just sum up, if I heard correctly, you believe in a strong succession plan should be in place and visited frequently with manageable outcomes that have reachable goals. Would that pretty much sum it up?
Pretty much, yes, sir.
Thank you, Chief. Okay, continuing, let's go with Chief Brian Brown.
Very good. I'm going to share a screen with you here. And we're going to get this up and running. And hopefully you can see this here. Yes, no?
Yes.
Yes.
Very good. All right.
Hey,
So
Brian, excuse me, Brian, click the display settings up there.
yes.
I think because right now we're seeing a bunch of click display settings, and I think it says slideshow. Because we're just seeing a little, we're only seeing kind of about half of it right now.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, try it. There you go. Perfect.
Got it.
All right. Excellent. Thank you. So succession planning 101. Much like Terry, I had a succession plan in place in my department, and was actually supported by management, approved by the chief, and moved forward. So succession planning is really pretty easy on the line or firefighter side, because there's pretty much a standard procedure of getting promoted. So that would be the succession plan. Not so much on the staff or the support side. So really for the formal organizational expectations, missions, values, vision, code of ethics, and strategic plan, that was shared with the group. Much like Paul Darley said this morning, you got to have those in place. You have to be able to share those with the group. If you don't, technically none of those exist in your department. Talk about the 5 S's really, and it's service, safety, and then we're going to go to succession, which is a big one, solidarity, and then the security. Those were the 5 S's that we used internally, with the big one being the succession side. And we actually had a really good plan in place, and I had several people in line that I supported and actually helped them through the process by providing knowledge, education, training, and supported them 100%. Also took and delegated some of that information too. So with the succession side of that too, you're going to do with the recruitment selection. The recruitment selection could be internal or it could be external. Long-term succession plan. There's a difference between short-term and long-term. prepare each other for succession. That was a big one, is helping each other out, providing the tools for those people to succeed. And the coach goes along with the coaching, mentoring, and the training. Educational requirements. We did have educational requirements in place for those that were going to actually succeed / take my position. And they had to meet those educational requirements because those were standard in the department. A lot of times if it doesn't work, which it sounds like in Terry's position, it doesn't. And I'll go a little further into mine, it kind of fell through. Now you're doing what a lot of folks are doing right now. I'll trade you two Michael Jordans for Barry Bonds and one New York fireman. So it almost came out to the point of doing another search internally in the department and or reaching out to other departments and almost headhunting to get somebody to come in and do that. You got to be very careful of that. So it's only as we develop others that we permanently succeed. And that's really the key point to me for leadership, is the more you support them, educate them, and provide them the tools, the better it makes them. And really one of my goals was I want them to be able to jump in and actually make this division and this process better than I did. So along that comes the security side of it too. So we're going to have the health and wellness, you got the salary and the benefits, and the retention side of that. Does that fall in line with your succession program, where you're looking at the health and wellness side, especially salary and benefits? I've seen a lot of departments that actually change the salary and the benefits when that division director, manager, and or chief steps out, and they replace them. So the true nature of leadership is really sacrifice. And when you're doing the succession plan, you have to sacrifice yourself to help others with the leadership side of that. And again, as you rise in leadership, responsibilities increase and the rights decrease. Your rights decrease. So you have to, and part of that has to do with everything that I had control of and everything that I managed and all the different committees I was on, is now taking and delegating that to others so that you can make them turn into a leader, or see if they're capable of being able to lead that division or that program and be able to sit on that committee. Part of that has to do with, are they accepted by the other members too? And really, it's all of our responsibilities to grow. And there's a growing process with the succession plan, big time. So, and it's really the leader's responsibility. So my responsibility to my people was to help them grow. And then really, where do we go from here with the succession plan? Is the things that I would ask folks, and that I would ask you if you're in that role, is senior leadership your heart's desire? And if so, for what reason? Is senior leadership the best choice for your family or for your agency? Not always great for the family members. There's a lot of impact on the family side that a lot of people don't realize too, because as a leader, it takes more of your time, more of your energy. And will you be as passionate and prolific as a leader as you are in your current position? Hopefully you're going to actually be better. And do you have a servant's heart and a teachable spirit? Even as a leader, we still need to be learners, and we still need to be taught. Are you prepared for the challenge, change, or future needs? Yes or no? And the big one that we were dealing with in my department is we were going through a merger and a consolidation while undergoing accreditation, national accreditation. Does that have an impact on that? Absolutely, it does. And with that impact, that means that there's also a change of leadership internally. So with the change of leadership, does your succession plan continue to stay on track, or does it change? It actually changed in my position, much like Terry's.
Okay, thank you, Chief Brown. Also, thank you for the plug for New York firemen, being here in New York. So I appreciate that. But
You're
it brings
welcome.
up it brings up another point too. So we have a past chief there from Canada, Chief Brown. I think you spent a lot of your career in Colorado. You're now in Kansas.
Yes, sir.
Chief West, who we're going to hear from in a few minutes, is from Arizona, and Chief Delagi is from Suffolk County, Long Island, New York. So the same questions I think apply to different parts of the country, and I want to make sure we get to all the presenters, and then we'll have a time for questions from our attendees, and Kevin can help me out with that. But I think also the size of the department really matters as to your plan. So let's hold off on that question. We'll come back to that if we can answer it a little later. But continuing with our presentation, Chief Delagi.
Thank you, Phil. Well, the slides up okay?
We don't see him yet.
Anything yet?
No.
No, sir.
Okay, let me hit the share screen again. And you should see it now.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Glad to join you guys today. Glad to be asked to do this presentation, something that's very, very near and dear to my heart. And I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach here as it relates to an apparatus management type of a training program. And I'm going to talk about a better understanding of managing your fire apparatus and ambulance replacement programs includes how to manage your agency in terms of the long term. And I'm going to try to show you through my experiences why what Chief Brown just presented is so vitally important. So my first disclaimer here is this is absolutely not a talk about volunteer bashing. I want to make that crystal clear. This is not volunteer bashing, and this in no way diminishes the astonishing level of volunteer commitment across our entire country. And my talk and my career work has really focused on preserving the volunteer system, which is where I come from. So I spent 44 years as a volunteer. I continue to serve my community when I go back home to visit. Of those 44 years, 33 years of them as an administrator in our county fire rescue and EMS system, and 28 years as an educator, teaching a whole bunch of disciplines. So I've really seen both sides of the issue. I've seen how a lot of different agencies thrive. I've seen how some agencies merely survive. I've seen a few agencies actually wither away, give up their operating certificates, go out of business, those kinds of things. And we want to really kind of prevent that from happening. So I'm not sure how many people outside of the New York area kind of realize how big the volunteers are. And until I started doing some research years ago, I never realized how big it was across the country. So if you take a look here, 82% of the fire departments across the United States are volunteer departments, and a staggering 745,000 volunteer fires compared to a much smaller number of career firefighters. So really, the fire service is supported largely through the volunteer effort, where we rely on people who are professionals, who are well-trained, dedicated to their community, and have a tremendous amount of experience. To some degree, they perform the job because they love it, not because of a salary. They perform the job because they love it. But what concerns me, and as I start to look at the changes critically, more than half of our volunteers have less than 10 years of service in the business. And that really speaks directly to leadership. And our numbers actually are trending downward, which is another concerning point, which I'll talk about in a couple minutes here. So, you know, you get elected to be an officer or to be a chief in your department. And so now what? You become a CFO, you become a CEO, you become a human resources manager, you become a fleet service manager in many cases. And really, you were probably elected to the position because you are a really, really good firefighter. And you rise up the ranks because you're a good firefighter. Some people get elected in the volunteer service because it's their time. You know, they've been in the company for a long time and it's now their turn to become an officer. Sometimes they get elected because they're popular, not necessarily because they're best. Sometimes they get elected because of a particular viewpoint on a platform that's important to the voting members of the department. And a lot of times when you get elected to these positions, the word authority emerges instead of the word responsibility. So Tom Dick, anybody who's in EMS knows Tom Dick, a very well-known paramedic, an educator, a national speaker, and an author. And I've always lived by these words, and I wanted to show them to you today. And I bolded some of the more salient points in the interest of time here. But he talks about no matter how talented you think you are, you need to continue to educate yourself. Leading people is much tougher than putting out the fire, honestly. What makes somebody a great responder does not make them a great leader. The leader has to be a planner. We've heard a lot about that through this conference. Leadership and management is a very different behavior than being a fireground boss. And without the right kind of training, it's sort of the service's fault that we don't appropriately prepare our officers to become officers for a lot of different reasons. And I think we have some room for change there. And so taking a look at the past, we've heard a lot about this. Taking a look at the past, Carl Sagan, a noted scientist from the 70s and 80s, actually said, you have to know the past to understand the present, and you have to know where we are and how we got here so that we need to know where to be. And for the first time in our generation, we now have at least 4 generations of responders in the volunteer service. And I don't have to tell anybody in the audience how difficult that is when you put people of varying, experiences and age levels into the same room, what can happen. And that certainly does affect leadership and management. And also importantly, it affects the people who are going to be our current leaders and our future leaders. And now is the time to start to take some steps for that. And I'm not going to read every bullet on here. These slides will be made available to you, but just to give you a quick look at the past here in terms of, what it used to be like: less training, less time consuming, fewer responsibilities, fewer alarms, and those kinds of things. At that time, the firehouse was the center of the community social structure. So everybody gravitated to that firehouse. And then now we have these emerging economic factors. Volunteers are working multiple jobs. Their spouses are working. They have children who have childcare needs. And oh my God, soccer, lacrosse, dance, you name it. We're ferrying our kids all over the town instead of being available. We're a highly mobile society. We take vacations. We leave the district. In my area specifically, real estate and costs and taxes are forcing out the tradesmen and the blue collar workers who traditionally made up the volunteer sector in exchange for professionals and a transient workforce. We also have a much older population. They're less likely to volunteer. And if they're members, it is and I don't want to diminish anybody who's older, but firefighting is a young man and woman's game. And very often from a safety perspective, we're turning out people on a truck who it's very difficult to say, okay, what I'm thinking. It's very, very challenging, but it is a young person's game. The community demographics are changing. We have less people volunteering in our communities. And we now have obviously higher EMS calls, higher fire duty calls. We have more risks to prepare for, like active shooter and ambush of first responders and so on and so forth, not to mention the funding challenges. Technology has changed, advanced pre-hospital care, which leads to more training, new state-of-the-art equipment that leads to more training, new fire safety issues like fire behavior and hazards, and you see the list here, infectious disease, technical rescue, hazmat, so on and so forth. And importantly, I think we have to all admit that the new generation of volunteer brings a very different level of dedication, commitment, and experiences. That's just a fact. So what we see in our agencies now is a more complex administrative responsibility, a more complex area where we have regulatory compliance, overextending their time to now require more on-duty time, more leadership time, more management time. Chief Brown just spoke about that. In the volunteer service, we're also handcuffed by the fact that we can only draw from the talent in our own department, and we change leadership every 2 years. So when you talk about strategic planning, whether it's for vehicle maintenance, vehicle apparatus, vehicle purchasing, or whether you talk about managing a department, it's very, very difficult to do. So what we've seen here too is that most of the officer training revolves around tactical operations, how to be a good fireground boss. And, you know, in a lot of instances, despite all the challenges that I put forth to you, we've adapted very, very well. Most agencies have hired salaried responders or partnered with other agencies on extended or expanded mutual aid to deal with the issue of increased response in the face of decreasing volunteers. And my feeling on this is that we need to recognize this, at the same issues have an effect on the leadership equally as it does to the response side of the house. And we need to begin to explore more strategies to enhance leadership in our ranks.
So I got a couple of quick questions if I could jump in.
Yes, sir.
Can you also, what do you think is the primary barrier to growth and sustainability in the volunteer fire service compared to the paid service?
So I think the growth and sustainability is directly related to 2 bullet points on the previous slide. That being, you know, you can only draw from your own department, which is limited in terms of its membership, and we change every 2 years. So given that and all of the other responsibilities, plus the focus on tactical training, I think one of the solutions to that is to begin to train people in leadership and management as a prerequisite to becoming a company officer and some sort of advanced leadership and management for a chief officer. I don't know that we can sustain what 1021 requires in terms of going through fire officer 1, 2, 3, and 4. That would take someone's entire term as an officer to complete that building block curriculum. So I think we need to take from that, borrow from that, and give people the skills and knowledge needed.
Okay, and can you propose 1 or 2 useful suggestions that could potentially alter the landscape of the volunteer fire service to enhance succession planning?
Sure, so a couple. So the first one is to consider salaried leadership. It worked very, very well when we started to pay people to respond on ambulances and fire apparatus. So starting to now extend that thinking and perhaps hire salaried leadership. There are several not-for-profits, which I'll get to in a couple of slides, where this is very, very successful. I think we need to continue to encourage the development of those leadership and management training programs. And I take a look at what we in New York have as a fire district manager. Fire district managers were born only about 20 years or so when the complexities of managing a fire district became very, very challenging for the 5 elected commissioners and their secretary and their treasurer. So this position called district manager was born and essentially runs the fire district at the behest of the 5 elected officials. That has been extraordinarily successful in enhancing the way fire districts operate. I think we can take that same strategy and apply it to managing the fire department.
Okay.
So here are those organizations that are very, very successful. You'll recognize them all: the AHA, the Red Cross, Leadership, Little League of the Americas, UNICEF, Doctors Without Borders, the list goes on and on. So the question is, what do they all have in common? And the answer is, they all have salaried leadership that relies on a robust cadre of volunteers to fulfill the mission. If it works for the Little League, and if it works for UNICEF, and if it works for the United Way and Habitat for Humanity, I don't see why it can't work for the volunteer fire department. So some of the proven benefits here, obviously, it's going to relieve the administrative burdens on the volunteers. It's going to improve staffing levels by making volunteers more available to get the rigs out. It will add to the sophistication of our administrative support, and it will allow us to do what business does. And when you think about it, we are a business. Consistent and a long-term approach, the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan, the things that you see on the screen before you, I think there are many things and many benefits to having this type of a leadership. But I caution you that no cookie cutter solution is going to work for everybody. So you have to take a look at your department. You have to take a look at your community hazard vulnerability assessment. You have to take a look at the changing demographics, the volunteer makeup, how you recruit volunteers. In many cases, departments still wait for volunteers to come to them to join. They know where we are. If they want to join, they'll come to us. But I say no. In this day and age, you have to go out and you have to have an active recruitment policy in place and an active recruitment plan so that you can constantly feed your membership. So taking a look at volunteer leadership with a volunteer workforce and salaried volunteer membership mix, that's where we're at now. but maybe we look at salaried leadership with volunteer responders. Maybe we look at salaried leadership and drivers with volunteer responders, and maybe we look at salaried leadership and responders with volunteer drivers. There's lots of people in our community who haven't aged out of firefighting, or I'm sorry, who have aged out of perhaps firefighting, but can still drive the rig. And we need to take a look at that. I saw a comment before, somebody in the chat room, that said, take a look at your community and look at your membership and assign them jobs that they're capable of doing instead of dunning them for not getting on the fire truck anymore. And I think that's a cultural thing that has to change. Okay. So kind of think about it here. Organizational responsibilities bigger than the individual interests. Augmenting our volunteer forces with salaried staff will actually serve to preserve our volunteer agencies. We need to have well-trained people on a consistent basis. How we get them is irrelevant. How we manage them is key. Nobody cares when the fire truck or the ambulance pulls up whose staffing it is. They just want a competent, capable, timely, professional response. And so our current and future leaders are obviously in charge of the destiny of the organization. And I was using this move, adapt, or die. But in the last presentation, I really kind of liked that quote from Frank Zappa that Beth Craw had stated, which is Frank Zappa's quote. And it's certainly fitting here. Without deviation from the norm, which we have come to accept over decades of service, progress is not possible. So we need to avoid the boiling frog theory. And everybody knows about the boiling frog theory. It's a metaphor that's often used to describe the lack of vision or the lack of preparedness. So you put the frog in boiling water and the frog perceives the risks, jumps out and saves himself. But if you keep the frog in the pot of tepid water and keep turning up the heat a little bit at a time, very, very slowly, over time, the frog will actually cook to death because the frog gets so comfortable in the water that he doesn't perceive the risks and the danger. So I want to thank you for allowing me to participate in this roundtable. I hope you find the comments useful. I know that time is limited. I apologize for speaking so quickly, but again, I know the slides are available to the audience, and I'm happy to move on to the next evolution here. Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, continuing, Chief West is a retired division chief from Northwest Fire District, is in Tucson, Arizona, which is an accredited an ISO 1 agency. Currently, he's the principal of Ironwood Strategic Solutions, a consulting company that focuses on fire and emergency medical services organizations. He's also an instructor and peer assessment team leader for the Commission on Fire Accreditation International. Chief?
Hi, thank you. So I too have a screen to share. Bob, if you could just continue sharing yours, I'll see if I can pull up mine here. How's that looking? You there?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I wanted to take some of the elements from the previous presentations, concentrating primarily on succession planning and apparatus replacement programs, and relating that to elements from accreditation that some of you may be familiar with from the Commission on Fire Accreditation International. And so with that, I'm hoping that some of you are familiar with accreditation. And in fact, I know there's some folks out there that come from accredited agencies, but if you're not, in a very succinct, short sentence, that this is what accreditation is all about. And I won't read the slide to you, but accreditation process differs from ISO, and the ISO takes a very focused look at an agency efforts to prevent fires as well as respond and suppress fires. Whereas accreditation is really an A to Z effort to look at a department in 10 different categories, varying from administrative and governance elements all the way to external relationships. And in fact, there are two categories that relate to the subject matters I wanted to hit on: succession planning as well as apparatus replacement programs. And that's category 6, physical resources, in fact, includes 8 performance indicators, which we'll talk a little bit about what those are, that cover apparatus acquisition, replacement, and maintenance. In category 7, human resources, which has a specific performance indicator covering succession plan. So before I move on, I want to be sure and emphasize that these applications from accreditation are applicable not only to paid and non-paid agencies, but certainly all agencies, whether you are involved in the accreditation process or not. And so I think you'll find that these elements are helpful with these two topics that I'm hitting on today. So one of the applications from the accreditation process is, as mentioned earlier, are performance indicators regarding apparatus replacement programs. And so here are 3 examples that one of which is directly related to apparatus replacement programs, 6C2 there, the middle bullet, and the other 2 should certainly have relationships, connectivity to apparatus replacement programs. And so those, and especially bullet number 2, you can see accreditation has a performance indicator very specific to replacement programs, and that exists for all apparatus support vehicles based on current federal and state provincial standards, vehicle condition, department needs, and requirements. So when we talk about performance indicators, there's well over 200 performance indicators that are involved in the accreditation process across these 10 categories. And elements of what makes up a performance indicator as an agency, for instance, on 6C2, they have to describe what their current situation is with a replacement schedule, appraise it. Is it working well? Is it not? And then lastly, what's the plan for the future for your replacement program that hopefully contains components of your appraisal. If it's working well and things are going well, the plan would be to continue that. If there's some elements that need improvement, the plan should include those things to get it to where you want it to be. So that's the basic components of a performance indicator. As mentioned earlier, human resources category 7 includes a succession plan that incorporates mentoring. And so again, the same principle here, where an agency addresses where they're at with it, appraise it, and plan moving forward. A number of performance, number of categories require an annual program appraisal in the accreditation process. The fire element, EMS, service delivery programs, all those service delivery programs require an annual appraisal. And while there isn't a specific requirement in the accreditation process currently for performing an annual program appraisal, I bring it up because I think it's a great place to, or a great thing to implement, as you can see in the quotes there, what that performance indicator includes. And so you can merely apply to Fleet, if you will, in terms of not only measuring how effective your apparatus replacement program is, but the entire division. Using that to identify gaps will help you improve succession planning in your apparatus replacement program and in general, your entire fleet program. And as mentioned earlier, the elements to address that annual performance indicator of annual appraisal programs, same as the other performance indicators. You're describing what the current situation is, appraising it, and writing a plan for the future for it. Okay, and as I've heard several gentlemen speak to already, strategic plan is required by an accreditation process, but certainly has application for every fire service out there, and it's super important in regards to that. So if you're coming up on needing to develop a strategic plan, or if you don't have one, or if you're updating it, great opportunity to include these two elements in your strategic plan, both succession planning and the development of an apparatus replacement program. Lastly, an application from accreditation is the Community Risk Assessment Standards of Cover document. It's a required document for the accreditation process. However, there are many agencies out there that aren't necessarily a part of accreditation that have developed this or are in the process of developing it. They see a lot of advantage to it, even though they may not be involved in the accreditation process. And what a community risk assessment standard of cover includes is the identity and to assess the risk specific to your community and then allocating an effective and efficient distribution and concentration of resources to appropriately respond and mitigate those identified risks. Well, how does that relate to apparatus replacement? Part of the process identifies what are the appropriate apparatus types that the agency should have available that are specific to risk identification. And when agencies do this, when they apply a systematic approach to risk and then in turn developing an effective response force for a particular emergency, sometimes they find the apparatus they currently have in place isn't appropriate. And also with new acquisitions, it's used to ensure they're acquiring the best apparatus for that particular risk in the community. So that, in a whirlwind summary, is some applications from accreditation and how they may be used to move forward with succession planning, as well as an apparatus replacement program. And certainly there are a number of other elements that can contribute to a better management, better leadership efforts within the agency and certainly within the fleet department as well, specific to that. So with that, I'll turn it back over to our host.
Okay.
Any
So
questions?
you might have answered this question already, but let me pose it. So I agree. I think many of us have heard or are involved in the Commission of Fire Accreditation International's accreditation process. Can you tell us any more about any applications of the process that an organization, paid or unpaid, could apply to succession planning and as an apparatus replacement program? Sorry for the long question,
Really quick question. A couple more questions are good, but just try and keep the responses of the answers just to no more than 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the entire process it's a self-assessment process. And so it's looking at every aspect of the organization, and certainly category 6, physical resources, includes comprehensively those 8 performance indicators that are available through the self-assessment manual at CFAI's website. And I would encourage anybody to purchase that and use that as a basis for evaluating where you're at and where you want to go in terms of your fleet service. That obviously would include apparatus.
Hey, Gary, if I may, whether you want to do accreditation or not, that's a great resource to be able to use to do an internal assessment.
Absolutely. So, ditto.
I know we've pretty much eaten up the break time, but I think this is important. And if I could sum it up, I'm going to use Chief Stewart's quote. So I believe we're all in agreement that we need to have a strong succession plan in place and visit it frequently with manageable outcomes that have reachable goals. That does apply to the volunteer service. We have some personal experience here in New York, and also for the paid departments, that we need to have that strong plan, because without it, then your fleet service and your department is going to suffer by not having that plan in place. Kevin, you jump in here and.
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple more questions, but I think for the most part, we're going to do a quick little 5-minute break, and I'm going to bring up the next speakers right now. So I want to just thank Gary, Terry, Bob, Brian, Philip. You all did a fantastic job. Learned a lot there. So we're going to take a quick break now, and I'm going to show some videos, and then I'm going to bring the other speakers up. So
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, everybody. Stay
Thank
safe.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.